Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen. So today, like I said in the teacher message video, what I want to talk about is I want to go ahead and talk about the presidency of Andrew Jackson. Now, we're going to start at the election of 1824, but I just want to review real quick just to kind of remind us how we got here. So, if we remember, we were talking about the last couple of classes. We've been talking about the era of good feelings, and that happened during the presidency of James Monroe. He won the presidential election in 1816 and in 1820, and during that time, you have a long stretch of economic growth and economic prosperity, as well as you have a period of time where the United States is really going to kind of make sure that its interests are secure and its borders are secure, with such things as the Monroe Doctrine, telling Europe that they should not be involved in anything that happens in the Americas, kind of to stay out of the Americas. The United States will be the ones that take care of that. So that sense of security and that sense of economic boom and economic wealth and growth is going to lead to a sense of nationalism, like we talked about last class. Those two things are really going to kind of create a sense of pride in the people of the United States. So the election of 1824, after Monroe finishes serving his second term, is going to really be kind of an end to that sense of nationalism, to the era of good feelings. And in large part, the reason that that is going to happen is because the four candidates that are going to run for the presidency in 1824 are going to get a lot of support in different sections of the country. No one president is going to really be able to get support across all areas of the country. If we look, John Quincy Adams mainly gets his support from New England. We can see his color right up here. William Crawford, the other candidate, another candidate who ran, he mainly gets his support from Georgia and Virginia. Henry Clay, being the congressman from Kentucky, gets a lot of support from Kentucky, gets some support from Ohio and Missouri. And Andrew Jackson, for the most part, gets a lot of his support from the southern part of the United States and from the western part of the United States. So that doesn't mean that he didn't get support from other places, but the largest part of his support came from the southern states and the western states. So we can see that these different presidential candidates have support from different areas of the country. Now, John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay also represent the wealthier class of the people of the United States. These are large landholders or large business owners. They're wealthy, they're well educated. Andrew Jackson, on the other hand, really represents those that are everyday common people like you and me. They are people that don't live in houses that have 4 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms. They don't own a large business. They have an everyday person's job. They are the common man. That's who supports Andrew Jackson. Crawford is supported by anyone who believes in states' rights, who believes that the states should have more power than the national government. But the important ones to look at are John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay, who are supported by the wealthy class, and Andrew Jackson, who is supported by the common person and is seen as the common man's candidate. So the election of 1824 happens, and as we can see, Andrew Jackson is able to win the electoral vote and is able to win the popular vote. But the problem is Andrew Jackson does not win a majority of the electoral vote. In order to get a majority, you have to have 131 electoral votes. That is how you win the presidency. Andrew Jackson, as we can see, only gets 99 electoral votes, which means that the decision of who becomes president, according to the Constitution, now moves to the House of Representatives. The members of the House of Representatives are going to vote until one candidate gets a clear majority of the votes, and then that person becomes president. Now, Andrew Jackson believes that because he won the electoral vote and because he won the popular vote, the members of the House of Representatives will select him to be president. So he doesn't do a whole lot of talking to the congressmen from each state, the different congressmen. He believes that the House of Representatives will elect him. John Quincy Adams, on the other hand, he does a lot of talking to the different congressmen from the different states. And one of the key people that he talks to is Henry Clay. Henry Clay is the Speaker of the House and the person that is in charge of kind of performing the vote and carrying out the vote for in the House of Representatives for the election of 1824. So John Quincy Adams is able to kind of convince Henry Clay to support him, and many of Jackson's supporters look at it as John Quincy Adams was able to convince Henry Clay to support him, and as a result of that, John Quincy Adams wins the presidency and not Andrew Jackson. Now, some would have looked at that and said the more qualified candidate won. John Quincy Adams is well educated. He's well liked. Andrew Jackson is not well liked, and he's not really as well educated and doesn't fit into our system and doesn't fit into our society and into our class. So John Quincy Adams ends up winning the presidency. And a couple days later, John Quincy Adams names Henry Clay to be Secretary of State, a very powerful government position, one that had more power than the Speaker of the House that Henry Clay had before Adams was elected president. Now, many of Jackson's supporters are going to look at this and they're going to say that that was a corrupt bargain, and it's really going to anger many of Jackson's supporters. The other thing it's going to do is it's going to take and really hurt John Quincy Adams' reputation. Excuse me. He is now seen as a corrupt politician, and he is not going to be able to get a lot done in his presidency, and it's going to be very hard for him to win a second term with this view that he made, with people viewing that he made this corrupt bargain with Henry Clay to become president. So now we fast forward to the next election where John Quincy Adams is trying to win a second term, and Andrew Jackson, there we go, Andrew Jackson is running against him. So two things are different between the election of 1828 and the election of 1824. After the election of 1824, John Quincy Adams has taken a hit to his reputation. He's seen as a corrupt politician, somebody who was able to make a corrupt bargain to become president. So that's going to help Andrew Jackson win the presidency in 1828. The other thing that is going to help Andrew Jackson win the presidency in 1828 is the fact that by 1828, states have gotten rid of their voting requirements. There we go. You still have to be white, you still have to be male in order to vote. At this time, there is no constitutional amendment to allow African Americans to vote or to allow women to vote. So only white men can vote in this election, but there are no more literacy tests. There are no more property requirements. None of those things exist. So now you have universal white manhood suffrage. So all white males can vote. Okay? Now this is going to make the number of people that are able to vote skyrocket. So if we look at the election of 1824, you had 356,000 voters in the election of 1824. In the election of 1828, that skyrockets to 1,153,000 people. So a lot more people are going to be able to vote, and that's really going to change who is going to win, and it's really going to change what areas of the country those candidates are going to win. Also, the fact that there are only two candidates also influences that as well. So as we can see, Andrew Jackson is going to win in a landslide victory. He's going to win 178 electoral votes. And if I can read that right, he's going to win 647,000 votes in the popular vote. So he's able to really beat John Quincy Adams very easily. The only section of the country that John Quincy Adams really registers and he wins is in New England. Everywhere else is blue. Everywhere else, Andrew Jackson is able to win. So Andrew Jackson is going to take this and going to view this win as a mandate from the people, as a message from the people where they are basically telling him that they are okay with any decisions he makes and anything he decides he wants to do, any laws, any policies he may pass while he is president of the United States. So, as a result of the election of 1828, and as a result of the fact that Jackson thought that this election meant that the people had basically sent him the message that he could do whatever he wanted, one of the things that Jackson did decide to do and did one policy that he decided to put in place was known as the Indian Removal Act. Now, the Indian Removal Act happened in 1830. It was passed in 1830. And from 1828, when Jackson was elected, to 1830, when Native Americans were removed, Native Americans lived all throughout the southwestern U.S., southwestern United States. They had lived in settlements stretching from Florida to Mississippi, into Ohio, into Kentucky, all over the western United States. So many white settlers are looking to move farther west to gain more land, to be able to grow crops and stuff like that. And they are looking to kind of move on to some of the lands that Native Americans own. And they are growing louder and louder and asking Congress more and more and asking Jackson more and more to move the Native Americans off their land so that white settlers can settle on it and take that land and use that land to grow crops or whatever it is they wanted that land for. So in 1830, Congress and Jackson both kind of agree and kind of accept and kind of decide to accept that request, and they pass what is known as the Indian Removal Act. And Native Americans are going to be forced off their land, and they are going to be moved west to what is known, they're going to be moved out of Florida, Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi, and they are going to be moved to what was known at that time as Indian Territory, what is known today, which is the modern day state of Oklahoma. So I have a map real quick, guys, and I just want to show you if it'll load. So Native American tribes are moved out of Florida, Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi, and they are all transported to what is known as Indian Territory, what is today Oklahoma. Now, there are going to be some Native American tribes that do try to resist. In fact, most are going to try to resist. They are going to try to do it in different ways. Some are going to take and try to fight a war against the United States, but they will ultimately lose and be forced off of their land. Others, like the Cherokee, are going to try to do it kind of through the Supreme Court. Not fight a war, but try to challenge it through the Supreme Court. And they actually bring two cases to the Supreme Court. They bring the case Cherokee Nation v. Georgia Supreme Court, Cherokee Nation v. Georgia and Worcester v. Georgia. In these two cases, the Supreme Court basically says that the Cherokee Nation is an independent nation from the United States, and therefore Georgia cannot pass laws to force the Cherokee to leave, nor can the United States. The United States cannot force the Cherokee off their land and cannot force the Cherokee to leave. So essentially, the Cherokee feel, and by all measure of court cases and by measure of decisions of the Supreme Court and our understanding of how the Supreme Court works, the Cherokee were actually able to win that case and should have been able to stay on their land. However, Andrew Jackson, being no friend of Native Americans and being more a friend of the common man and white settlers, decided and is quoted as saying, John Marshall, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, has made his decision, now let him enforce it. Andrew Jackson had no intention of enforcing this Supreme Court decision, and the Supreme Court doesn't have a police force or anything like that that can enforce their decisions. They rely on the president to enforce those decisions. And when Andrew Jackson refuses, that basically kind of tears the force out of those two Supreme Court cases. And ultimately, the Cherokee are forced off of their land. And the Cherokee are taken on a forced march from Georgia all the way to what is today Oklahoma. And many are going to die on this journey, and it is going to be a very deadly, very terrible journey that the Cherokee are going to have to take. And this is really kind of a stain on the history of the United States. This is one of those events that we look back on when we look at history, and we realize that that was something that shouldn't have happened and is really kind of a black mark on the history of the United States. So, as I said, and just to give you a look at the map one more time, the Cherokee, the Creek, Choctaw, Seminole, and Chickasaw are going to be forced out of these 5 states and forced to march and travel to Oklahoma, to modern-day Oklahoma. And the Cherokee are going to be forced out of Georgia to travel kind of a roundabout way through Kentucky and Missouri and eventually make their way to modern-day Oklahoma. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there is one more thing I would like you to do, just so you have an idea of what the Trail of Tears was like. This is a link to a short video that I would like you guys to watch. This will give you a much better idea of what the Trail of Tears was like and kind of give you a better idea of the consequences of the Indian Removal Act. So what I would like you guys to do, I'd like you to go ahead and watch this video to gain a better idea of the Indian Removal Act and of the consequences of it. One more thing I will just want to make you guys aware of, and I mentioned it in the teacher message, but I want to go ahead and make sure I mention it again. If anybody's looking for a little more information about the Trail of Tears or wants to know a little more about the Trail of Tears, please go to the resources and take a look at the History Channel article. And also you can listen to this NPR podcast of the Cherokee perspective of the Trail of Tears. Both of those are very good, guys. If you want a little more information about the Trail of Tears, feel free to go ahead and click on those links under the resources. That will give you a lot more information about the Trail of Tears. But this was just kind of a rundown and just kind of an explanation of Andrew Jackson and his presidency. There were some aspects where he did try to kind of defend the common man, and there were also some aspects of his presidency, like the Indian Removal Act, which kind of give him a bad reputation as a president, and many will look at Andrew Jackson as a villain more so than a hero or a good president. So it's tough to see. It's not tough, but you can see the two different sides of Andrew Jackson. Obviously, he was very popular. He was seen as a common man's president, but he also did decide that Indian removal was something that was necessary and something that needed to happen. So there are two sides when it comes to history. There are two sides to Andrew Jackson. Is he a hero or is he a villain? That decision is up to you guys based on looking at this and looking at all of this information and kind of seeing what he did as president and who he was as president. So with that said, guys, please make sure you watch the video, and I will catch you guys tomorrow for your lesson review. Have a great day, guys.